In this section, we will discuss a few different software development approaches, namely the waterfall, agile, and lean development methods. Note that these are simply sets of principles that we're discussing, much like the test-driven development process that we have discussed before. The waterfall model of software development is a breakdown of project activities into linear, sequential phases. Each phase has clear requirements and deliverables. The later phases are dependents of the previous phase, much like waterfalls that generally flows downwards. In software development, the linear sequential steps are generally divided between conception, analysis, design, construction, testing, deployment, and then maintenance. In analogy to network engineering, an example would be that we're building a data center, so a project manager will go and gather the requirements, such as the line speed required by the service owner, the oversubscription ratio of the top of rack switch, as well as the core routers. Then the network architect will go take the requirements and go and design a topology. Maybe it is a traditional core distribution access topology, or maybe it is a factory topology. Then we will test the topology with the proof of concepts team. Then the design is passed down to the implementation team to build the data center. Once it is built, it is then maintained and supported by the NOC. This approach is generally less flexible because progress only flows in one direction. Despite most of the modern software approach moving away from this waterfall approach, there's some advantages of the waterfall development process. Let's talk about them. One of the advantages is that time spent early in the process could arguably reduce the cost in later steps. For example, if we thoroughly understand and document the user requirements, we do not implement anything that the users do not need. This saves a lot of guesswork from the design and implementation point of view. The waterfall approach is also very structured. It is easy to track the progress by looking at which stage the process is under. Because it is so structured and fixed, by nature, documentation should be completed in each of the steps. As mentioned, the modern software approach have largely moved away from this waterfall approach due to some of its disadvantages. Let's talk about them. The first disadvantage is that the user might not know exactly the requirements to begin with. If we go back to our data center design example, the service owner typically do not understand the bandwidth requirement until the service is launched. Even then, the requirements will vary greatly from the initial launch to service ramp up to high growth phase and finally to the tail end of the service. The initial requirement estimate is almost always not accurate. The second disadvantage is the disconnect between each of the phases. Imagine if the network architect does not perform implementation at all. He or she might not understand the difficulties of building out his or her design. I have personally experienced this many times over in my own career when the disconnect of team results in project delays, incompletions, and low team morales. The third disadvantage is in modern systems, it is usually very difficult to separate the roles of each teams. Can the operation team never support the devices they've built? Can the network designer be successful at their jobs if they have never implemented production systems? I think the answer is no. In almost all cases, we have to at least be somewhat familiar with all the other teams' jobs in order to perform our current job at our best. The fourth disadvantage, perhaps the biggest of them all, is the fixed structure of the process. In pure waterfall approach, once the stage is passed, we're unable to go back. So once we have written down the user requirements, we cannot go back and change those requirements, even if we wanted to. This is no doubt a fairly big negative in the modern technology world. Let us take a look at some of the other software development approaches.